All right, so this is just We the People news. I don't know. We got about 20 minutes left on this, and I think I'm just going to go ahead and deal with this in one video and try to keep my comments down at a very minimum, if not at all. Alrighty?
Dare I hope?
I try to focus on the positive, and a lot of this I focused on sort of the negative, which unfortunately, the jury being this is in my mind very, very detrimental to our democracy. But we do see some other places in the world
Republic, not
are
democracy.
kind of reinvigorating even their jury system. So in Argentina, they actually have a long history of a constitutional right to a jury trial, but it lay dormant for many, 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 many years. And in 2011, they started kind of a reinvigoration of that jury system. And now in several provinces, they have a criminal jury trial. And they based their jury actually on our system in the United States. And so that's, to me, a very nice development. And so Buenos Aires is one of the provinces that has a criminal jury trial. And then more recently, they have this phase 2 of this, which is putting in place a civil jury. And so they are excited about the idea of having community decision making on such issues as consumer rights types of issues, tort issues, some class action type issues. And so they do think that the community should be involved in these types of matters. And so it's neat, I think, to see another country that based their jury on our system, sort of saying now that this is an important an institution that should decide important issues. And so I think we can look to that to say there's some continued hope for the importance of lay participation in our system.
Yeah. Well, just in general, one thing that has always struck me as important about the participant of lay participation is I had someone recently say, oh, we should narrow down who can get on a jury just to people with voter registration because they are, that signals that they are more politically, involved and knowledgeable and, aware. They're not just J random person off the street kind of thing. And I thought, well, actually, it kind of seems to me like it should be the opposite because we are all subject to the laws. And if we can't all understand them, if it takes some special knowledge or awareness to understand them, maybe we shouldn't be imposing a lot of those types of laws on people, especially if we're going to go around saying, oh, ignorance of the law is no excuse. So, yeah, it's really encouraging to hear that, some other place in the world is like increasing their appreciation for that sort of participation. That's very hopeful indeed. I should have probably put this question before that because I don't want to put a damper on this, but I do think we probably should touch on the pandemic a little bit. I didn't want to make this whole thing about it because everything has been about it, but it seems like the pandemic has really devastated our jury system in this last year. We have some courts where jury trials have been at a complete halt for months on end, where they're resuming. It's at a snail's pace and under extremely unappealing circumstances. Some places have face shields or masks, or there are questions about not wearing a mask because how do you see or assess a witness's or jurors' truthfulness if they're wearing a mask? There's plexiglass all over courtrooms in the Derek Chauvin trial that's going on right now. On day one, they had to remove some plexiglass because there was so much plexiglass that there were reflections and people couldn't see each other through that. And the public is largely excluded from courtrooms. The trial of the 3 St. Louis police officers, you couldn't, of course, go in. And so I tried to see that online, and you couldn't do that. In that federal court, you would have to email someone, register with them, and they would send you a phone number, and you would have to sit there on your phone listening. And also, you're not allowed to record it, so you can't go watch it in a convenient format later. And but most of all, speedy trial rights are being largely thrown under the bus. uh, is this kind of a temporary situation, or do you think there will be some longer term impact years from now after it's over? Where do you kind of see this situation going?
Yeah, unfortunately,
By the way, this was September 21.
I think the pandemic makes everything worse. We already have a situation where we have people in the system who think that there are not enough resources and aren't even asking for more resources to have more jury trials. And then you have now where people actually wanted a jury trial, they're being asked to wait for one. Some of them will give up and plead guilty, in criminal cases. Some of them on the civil side will, give up and settle. Some of those people will, because judges feel more pressure, will actually dismiss more cases, I believe, because there's more pressure. And so I think, unfortunately, this makes everything worse. Yeah, I wish I had something to say that it just makes everything worse.
Yeah. Since you mentioned resources, I thought I'd integrate one of our audience questions here. Let's see, I believe this was Shannon. Yes, Shannon. Shannon says, in my understanding, jury trials are expensive, and even though there is a constitutional right to jury trials, there's little to no federal funding for jury trials at the state level, and states have varying levels of financial resources. Do you have any thoughts on a solution to the funding problem?
Sure. I think that's certainly an important question, and I think we can start thinking about that question when we actually kind of get away from the.
I'm going to pause right there on that, okay? Look, y'all. Right or wrong, it is nowhere in the Constitution says they have to pay you. In fact, if the state pays you to do something, you're in contract with the state, and that's conflict of interest against you. So if your jury is getting paid from the state, that would still be classified as conflict of interest, people. Even though it may not be, it's still classified. Why? Because the state is paying somebody to judge you. And that, in fact, you are bound to the state's wishes.
Idea that it's okay to, let's say on the criminal side, tax the jury trial. I think that you have to value the right. There's no value for the right now. But let me sort of, I know that sounds sort of like I'm avoiding the question. I'm not. I think you have to value the right to give resources to the right. And right now, currently, there isn't a value placed on this right. Everyone in the system believes that it's okay. Not everyone, but prosecutors in the system, for the most part, judges in the system believe it's okay to penalize people for exercising the right. And if that's the case, then if all the people in the system think that, there's no effort to actually put resources into the system. And there's lots of money. There's lots of money. I'm not saying that states don't lack money, but there is lots of money. They put lots of people in prison. To me, if you're going to make these laws that are criminalized matters, you have to put resources into what the Constitution actually requires, and that is trials. So we almost need to back up and say, okay, we put all these laws in place to criminalize conduct, and now we're doing some kind of efficiency thing to throw people in prison. And again, I'm just focusing on the criminal side at this point. And I think we need to back up and say, what are the resources to actually do that? And I do think there are resources. I think there are resources that are out there. I'll just focus for a second on the federal level, and I know this is different from the state level. I live in Illinois. Let's just say, if you look at the stats for Illinois, we don't have we have less money. It looks like, at least, than most states. But on the federal side, there's tons of money put into beautiful courthouses that are empty. There's tons of money put into just lots of other things like food, sort of beautiful courtrooms and beautiful chambers, and I'm just talking about some of the judicial aspects. I mean, there's a ton of money put into every part of the government. And so I get that that's different than the states, and your question talks about the states, and I definitely understand that there are issues with respect to the states. But I think we don't value the right, and once we value the right, we will find more and more resources to be able to, sort of give people the chance to actually have their cases tried.
Yeah. Are there 2 or 3 things that maybe are somewhat real?
If you value a right, it turns it into a privilege. People, just saying.
Realistic? I'm not saying slam dunk, but at least plausible in today's legal, social, political, economic, etc. climate, that seem hopeful in terms of what we can do going forward to restore trial by jury to a useful and meaningful role in the legal system in this country?
Yeah, so one of the things I'll say, I believe that you shouldn't be able to tax or penalize anyone at all for taking a jury trial in a criminal case. But some countries have this limitation on how much you can penalize or tax someone for taking the jury trial. I think we could get to that point relatively easily if sort of there was some movement around how this is very, very sort of coercive and a bad practice to highly tax someone for taking a jury trial. Think the boarding curfew case that I mentioned earlier. So that's on the criminal side, and a lot of work would have to happen, but I think that there's you see sort of precedent elsewhere where that works. On the civil side, I think that one of the things that I haven't sort of mentioned is summary judgment, and summary judgment is this concept that a judge can decide prior to trial that a reasonable jury couldn't find for the plaintiff. And this is done a lot in factually intense cases. And if anyone's interested, just take a look at my website, and there are op-eds about this on the front page, where you have crazy facts of employers doing certain things to employees, that is, people at the employment, and these cases being dismissed before a jury gets to hear it, saying, "Oh no, a reasonable jury couldn't find this as sexual harassment or racial harassment." And I believe all of you would say that that was possible for a jury to say. And so that procedure, it's very heavily used, and it results in over 70% of cases where the summary judgment motion is brought or request is brought, that cases are dismissed by judges. I think that could be very much reformed if enough attention is brought to this issue, which then brings me again to this documentary project that I'm trying to blow this up and really show the public what our current legal system actually is. And so I think there's hope. I think it's going to take some years, but I think there's some hope.
And while you were talking, I'm copying and pasting the link to your website, sujathomas.com, to make sure you've got it in front of everyone on both Zoom and Facebook, and a couple of FIJA links as well. I want to make sure that I give you the last word. We have about 5-6 minutes here, so no rush. Is there anything that we haven't covered in this discussion that you'd like to cover? Anything that maybe you want to hit more points about. Any closing thoughts? And again, take your time. We've got plenty of time.
Sure. I think, we've talked a lot about the criminal jury, and I think the civil jury is also important. And I talked a little bit about that. And I think that that doesn't get there's not a lot of focus of attention on those cases. And I think I also wanted to sort of emphasize that very, very, very few cases get tried by juries, civil juries, less than 1%. And one of the problems, and that hasn't been mentioned, is something called arbitration that many of you may know something about. We, every day, because of credit cards, of Amazon, getting a pizza from Domino's, there are arbitration clauses in almost every transaction like that. And what that means, on a normal basis, is it's sort of like, okay, I'm giving up that. What it is I'm giving up my right to a jury trial. Well, maybe that doesn't matter normally, but it does matter in the scheme of things. So when AT&T does something wrong, and it's $30 dispute for you, and maybe that's not a lot of money for one person or another person. It may be more money to some person or another, but if you can't bring what's called a class action, and you have to bring it before one judge or three judges who are probably former lawyers who are paid by the company over and over and over again, the chance of you getting justice in that case, the way you would get justice before a jury, is very low. And so, and some of you even may, with your employer, may be signing these arbitration agreements. And if you have any type of dispute with your employer, you're subject to arbitration. And so the book doesn't do this as much, but the film that I'm making makes reference to arbitration and the problems with that, and the problems with what are called repeat players, and that is these same people who are paid by companies deciding these cases. And again, we haven't talked much about this, but juries, they're not super diverse in some time.
Kind of like workman's comp, y'all. Even with workman's comp, you have a right to jury, right? That's under a common law thing of the Sixth Amendment. Anything above $20. However, when do you ever see that happen? Just saying. And then these corporations end up beating you, winning, and you're stuck without nothing. I know.
In some circumstances, but they're more diverse than one person deciding. And when I talk about diversity, I'm talking about all kinds of diversity. I'm talking about diversity of experience. Kirsten and I, if we compared our lives, they would probably be very different, and both of us bring good, interesting perspectives to any particular case, just like all of you do. And so, but that changes when you have one person decide, whether that be an arbitrator, whether that be a judge, whether that be a prosecutor, or even a police officer. Because one of the things that I point out in the documentary is that, again, even in criminal cases, just a police officer can decide because prosecutors often don't have time to investigate. So
I had to say I did not know that.
I just wanted to kind of point out the arbitration aspect.
Don't think that's not conflict of interest, right, people?
And then all of this kind of comes together to just sort of say that we have 3 different provisions in the Constitution that provide for a right to a jury trial. Unfortunately, that is not an important part of our system, our democracy right now. And I think it contributes to our democracy not being as good as it can be. People think about voting rights all the time and how important voting rights are. Well, our rights as jurors to decide cases every day, to me, is just as important as voting rights. And I hope that that's one of the things that you get out of this our webinar.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I like to tell people that, you're called on maybe once or twice a year to cast a ballot, but you could be called on any time of the year. And with just 2 words, a single 2-word vote, you could actually save someone's life. So thank you very much for emphasizing that. It's something that I think is seen as sort of a lesser civic duty very commonly. And I would like to see it become the more prominent civic duty, just because it can be anytime. You don't know when you're going to get called.
And even participation to convict someone. So
Right.
we sometimes believe that someone should be going, being convicted and going to prison for some doing some wrong. And so that's also not just saying no, it's also saying
That's very true. That's very true. Yeah, we tend to focus on the not guilty because we focus on jury nullification, but there are certainly some people that you don't want just running amok in society, who do need to be dealt with in certain ways, and that can also be saving lives. Just to wrap up, I want to thank you so much for joining.
All right. This is We the People News, y'all. Bye.